Hey, it's Tiffany. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know I'm feeling this pull away from social media and towards real connection. And that's exactly why I started my newsletter. It's a place for us to connect authentically without having to jump through algorithms. I usually share a little bit about what's going on in my life, my family, practical tips for 2 career homes, and just generally things that are inspiring me. I'd love for you to join me so we can create this little online space and we can lean into all of the ands in our lives together. You can sign up at the link in our show notes. Enjoy this episode. I'm a small town kid born with a big city spirit. I choose to play a lot of awesome roles in life: mom, wife, entrepreneur, CEO, board member, investor, and mentor. 17 years ago, I founded a marketing consultancy, and ever since, my husband JR and I have been building our careers and our family on the exact same timeline. Yep. That means 4 kids, 3 businesses, 2 careers, all building towards one life we love. When I discovered that I could purposefully embrace all of these ands in my life, it unlocked my world. And I want that for you too. I'm Tiffany Souter, and this is Scared Confident. Today we're going to talk to Karen Seketa. She's my head of talent at Element 3. My intention for this podcast is that some of it is certainly looking in the rearview mirror and talking about days of old, but it also is a process of exporting what are we solving today. And so one of the big things that we've solved recently inside the walls of Element 3 is Karen has totally revamped our hiring process. And we've have our first, I would say, like batch of people hired through that process, and it has created a significantly superior outcome. And so I thought, hey, we've really learned some stuff. I want Karen to come on and talk about that. And I think the other thing that is really interesting and unique is that Karen's been at Element 3 for over 10 years. And so the process that she had to break and redo was the process she built. And I think that's a really unique time in a business and even in a career to realize, like, hey, the thing I've built is no longer working inside of the environment today. How do I look at that with fresh eyes? That can be really difficult. So I wanted to share what we're doing. Just be generous with what it is that we're learning here at Element 3, and also have Karen kind of explore some of those areas with us. So that's what we're going to do. Karen, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
So give maybe a little bit of background on where your experience is as an HR pro, because marketing, that word has a lot of different pieces of the pie in it, just so listeners have context for like, this is kind of where you grew up, what you do, and then how you spend your time today.
Sure thing. So to really date myself, I guess you could say I've been hiring people since 1989, which is a very crazy number to say out loud. So you would think that I would know it all. Like I would know all the tricks and tips. But what the truth is that I actually know all the things not to do. So with maturity comes the realization that you're never as smart as you think you are. And you have to be open to being wrong and sometimes going scorched earth with things and starting over. So I have a lot of experience with hiring literally every level of person, from a hourly worker in a temporary staffing company to, all different positions at Lilly, which are many. And then also all of my years of hiring within smaller organizations. And then the last 10 years here at Element 3.
So you started your HR career in recruiting.
Yeah.
I think that's also particular, that like it's really where you started, it's where you've spent. If we're going to take a summary of where you've spent the most of your career, it's really been in recruiting. We've built this process that was working pretty well for us. And then in the last, I don't know, what would you say? When do you think we kind of saw it starting to break?
I would say probably 18 to 24 months ago. We did some hiring, used the same process we've always used. And within 90 days, we knew that we had made not just one error in judgment, but a number of them. And I knew at that point that since nothing else had changed, it was the system and the process we were using that was broken.
So we had a couple of, people who joined the organization where we realized this isn't working and they realized this isn't working. It's a different thing, even though the outcome is still that you have to let those people go, or you kind of come to terms together on that. It's a different thing when you know the responsibility is really on you as an employer.
Oh, it was 100% on me. And I felt it like all the way to my gut, because I'm pretty good at what I do most of the time. And you'd think for doing it for 30 some years that you would have the system figured out. And so I had to be extremely introspective, thinking about what happened. And instead of blaming it on us just hiring the wrong person, I had to take full responsibility of the fact that it was my process. It was just not working.
So is it worth talking through quickly what our process was, kind of how it started? Here's what we did. Here were the steps.
Without getting too tactical, our process before was a lot of instinct. It was hiring on how you felt about a person in the process, which I know every book you read says not to do that, but I will say for us, it has always worked. And so while we had a very rigid process and steps within it, to move from one step to the next, you just had to like the person and have a good interaction to keep things moving. We did not interrogate the types of things that we are now. And I think that's why it stopped working.
So what changed environmentally? Was it just us as a company? Was it the work? Was it the hiring environment?
I think we changed. I've seen a pretty significant evolution of talent within our walls. And the people that we did hire and did get right over time, they have just gotten better and better. And then the people who couldn't keep up with that level of evolution left. And so it was almost like we felt like it was a false indication that our hiring process was working because we did not evolve that while we were evolving everything else that we did within these walls.
And one of the I feel like unspoken realities of a service business, maybe others too, it's just this is the one we know, is that the teeter-totter between if on my right hand is the complexity of the client work and my left hand is the complexity of work we know how to do, keeping those in balance is hard. And we have literally years where we're like, we want to go try to find problems that make us sweat again, that we're solving at a level that's pushing us. And then we start to feel this tension of like, we've got a handful of people that know how to do that kind of work, but now it's starting to become a bigger percentage of our work portfolio. We have to go find people who know how to do that from their career or they're trained to do that. And this teeter-totter of keeping those things in balance is it's a big deal in this kind of a business.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the thing that I have found is that if you really break it down when you go to hire somebody, there are a couple things you're looking at. So you've got your set of non-negotiable skills. There are things they have to be able to do when they walk in the door. And those are things that are usually trained over time. You sort of accumulate that knowledge and that ability. There's another set of things that are called talents that are not things that you can teach somebody. And those are things that we're missing. We found like we weren't even looking for in some of the people. And those are things like grit, critical thinking skills. Those two alone, if you don't have those, you will not survive in our environment. And we weren't even measuring for them. And then you have the whole other set of things that are all teachable. And I think the mistake that a lot of companies make is that they want to require all of the things to get you through the door. And what I've distilled it down to is make sure they have the basic skills that you absolutely require for them to have when they sit in their seat on the first day. And then the grit and the critical thinking and other talents that we require for that particular role. And then just teach them the rest of it. Like we're good at that. And so that's probably one of the pivotal parts that's changed for us. And that is also a place that I see other companies fail when they're in the hiring process.
So what does it look like today? What are you were getting your master's at the same time, which was serendipitous, I think, for us, where you were in this place of getting just some really different inputs into the way you were thinking about hiring. So maybe talk about what you were learning and how that started to inform the choices that you made about how it looks now.
Yeah, I don't traditionally think academically. I think more based on theory and experience, my own feelings about things, and that generally works well for me. Going back and getting my master's in HR at Craner what it has opened up in my brain is looking at things from an academic standpoint, which has a tremendous amount of value. What it requires that you do is to really distill things down and look at them based on facts, on metrics, on data, on specific processes. And so what I did was I took what I was learning and applied it to making the changes that I did. And some of the more specific ones are around creating this as a multiple hurdle process, which basically means now there's a stopping point at every single step in our process where there's a scoring mechanism and then there's a minimum score that a person has to get to move on to the next step. And so we're eliminating people as we go, not based on gut feeling, but based on very specific things that we're doing in that particular step. We added in a more rigorous sort of assessment process. And I will say, I know there's a lot of controversy around using assessments when you're hiring. So I want to be clear about how we use those. we started using the predictive index, and we used both the behavioral and the cognitive. The cognitive is important because it helps you understand how quickly a person can learn. That doesn't mean they can't work here if they get a certain score. It just means we have to put them in the right job, just like the behavioral one talks about where they would thrive. The reason that those assessments are important is because we do not use them as a knockout factor. That is not a hurdle that they get a score and then they pass. That is merely a mechanism to ask the right questions the next time you meet with them. And so we also moved to behavioral-based interview questions, and I'm very specific about how I train on that for the people that help with hiring internally. And so the assessment informs the way that we set up these behavioral-based questions.
So can you, for people who aren't in HR, like what's an example of a behavioral-based question, and what would a question be if it wasn't behavioral-based, you know?
Yeah, it's closed-ended, open-ended, a little bit of what the criteria are, but there are right and wrong ways to do behavioral-based questions too. The way that I teach it here is that you'll ask a question that a person can't answer unless they have an experience to share. So you're going to ask someone a question that starts with something like, tell me about a time when you faced a very difficult problem that you had to solve. And then you just stop. The way that people sort of mess up the behavioral-based questions, and I'll have people that don't agree with this, but they will then continue to say, and tell me how that turned out, or talk to me about the results. And you're sort of leading the person to the answer when you're adding that. I have to get people here very comfortable with like putting the question on the table and then just shutting up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of power in that, but it's very hard to do. And so you're allowing the person to either be able to answer the question, or sometimes they can't, but it's not your job to get them there. The philosophy behind it is that if they indeed do have that type of experience or example to share with you, it will be top of mind. You shouldn't have to get them to dig for it. If they have to dig for it, it's not something they've either done recently or they've done very often.
I can see our like cultural aspect of wanting people to feel welcome.
Oh, totally.
And being a culture where we really work on having high emotional intelligence. We're like making people purposefully or unintentionally feel uncomfortable in the interview process would be a real stretch for us.
It's a very big change. And I have to be very explicit and specific when I am training someone on how to do it, because it doesn't come naturally.
Okay, so that's a piece of a behavioral interview. I also know we're doing like, I'll call them like practicums. So talk about that, and because we didn't do that before either.
One thing I'll say here is that I know talking about these different steps makes it feel like our process is very long and complicated. One thing I will say about that is that over the last couple of years, I feel like companies have been under unusual pressure to hire fast. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing is they're shortening their processes, and they think that they're not going to get the hot candidates because they're moving so fast. I would argue that the process itself, if it's intentional and it's moving quickly and you're constantly communicating with a person and you make the point of entry simple, that argument doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. It's like people appreciate the ease of entry and then constantly being informed of where they're going. And I will lay out this entire process is one of the first emails that somebody gets from me once they apply and I want to move them. So they opt in instead of me just sort of dragging it out.
So if I'm a candidate, I apply to a job, the first email I get from you says, you've entered our process and here's what's going to take place.
Exactly. And I also give them the compensation band so they know what they're getting into from the very beginning, because we like bury the lead when we hire people. We make them sort of wait for the big reveal of what the compensation is for a job. You should never do that. It can be a complete waste of somebody's time and very frustrating. And so don't force them to come along on the journey just because they're waiting for the information they need that you can give them up front. So to answer your other question, we did add in a kind of a live exercise per se. And it's different for every job, obviously. It's something that only should take the applicant about an hour to prep for. But then they come back into our office and they present their findings or their ideas or whatever the exercise is that is directly related to the basics of what's required to be able to do this job. So if it's for a digital marketing position, then they may put together a couple of slides about a solution around a digital marketing strategy for a company, not terribly in depth, but enough to like show that they know what to look for and what words to use, and also to get an idea of their presentation skills, because every person in this company is going to be talking to a client at some point, and so that is a requirement to be able to do that.
So who designs the exercise?
The hiring manager.
Okay. The hiring manager. And then is that exercise explained to the candidate?
It is introduced in one of the steps in our interview process. So the hiring manager will do an initial phone screen just to sort of make sure that the candidate has what they need to make a decision to keep moving, and that we can do a quick review of their background, that they're qualified. The next step is they actually come into our office for a more in-depth interview with the hiring manager. And that's at the point where they both talk more about like what's the predictive index assessment for, and then what does the exercise look like in this process.
So then they go home and complete the exercise? Is that, or do they stay here?
They go home, and then there's some steps in between that I will talk to them. Sometimes we'll give them a chance to engage with some other people in our organization. Whatever we do, it's to actually be helpful in the process, to make sure that this candidate has all the information that they need. Before they ever receive the exercise, though, they know it's coming, and once they get it, then they have direct connection to the hiring manager to ask all the questions they need to ask and make sure they have all the information that they need.
So they're given a couple days, but they don't do it in our office. It's not like they're giving it to them. We sit them in a conference room and then we come in a couple hours later. That's
no,
not what
they
happens.
complete it on their own.
Okay.
A lot of people would say, oh gosh, they could, use ChatGPT, or they could ask their friend to do it, which is fine. Let them, let the person do that, because they do then have to actually physically come in and deliver the information. And I will tell you that we have 3 people in the office, the hiring manager and 2 other folks that are in that department, that will ask them very specific questions about the exercise. And so much like behavioral-based interviewing, it's really almost impossible to not have actually done the work yourself.
And then that meeting is an hour, hour and a half, something like that?
Yeah, it's usually about an hour.
And then after that, what happens? They come in and they do the exercise.
That's the final step.
That's the final step.
And then I will let them know that once I sort of get that group back together and talk to them, if the next step is to give this individual an offer, then I actually set the offer up in a couple of different parts. So I always give what's called a pre-close. I will send the candidate every bit of information they possibly need to feel comfortable that when they get this final offer in their hands, they know what's coming. So they'll know compensation, time off, like everything. And I'll send them our handbook. They'll look that over, and if they have questions, which usually there are questions or 2, then we go back and forth and sort of sort all the details out. So by the time that they get the actual official offer that they would sign, there are no surprises. They know exactly what they're getting. And then the reference checks happen between the pre-offer and the final offer. I don't check references until I absolutely know that the person is comfortable with the offer they're going to get.
Okay. On average, from like I submitted my application to I have, let's say, the pre-offer in hand, how long has it taken us to get people through that process?
So the first time that I ran this process, this new process, I had a candidate who is now working here.
Share what you did. I think this is really interesting.
So I came across this individual. I do a lot of my recruiting directly through LinkedIn. So I had reached out to this person, and she was interested in talking to us. And interestingly enough, she wasn't in a huge hurry to make a change. So I had, some leeway in there. And so I basically asked her to understand that I was testing this new process and that it may take longer and we may screw some things up. And she had no problem doing that and was so gracious through the entire process. And it ended up taking with her probably, I would say, 4 months. Part of it was because she had some delays and part of it was because we did, but we were able to work out all of our kinks, like test things out. I was so grateful to her. And it also kind of made it a no-brainer from the perspective of her being a really solid core values fit for our company. So super happy she did it. And she was the first hire under that new process, and she's doing great.
I think that's really interesting that you brought the candidate into the truth, which is a very E3 thing to do.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, this is not a process we've perfected and I need you to be my partner in this.
Well, and it was good too to get her feedback and see it from her perspective, because she gave me some really good insights that I never would have gotten just sitting on this side of the table. You get very myopic in your systems and your processes because you think that, it's like customers that we work with who think they know what their own customers want from them. You don't. You have to actually ask them.
So what in a normal state? That one took 4 months. In a normal state, what do you think it takes us?
Again, it depends. I've had some that have gone fairly quickly. Like they have some urgency behind it, and I can always move it as fast as they want to.
What does that mean? Like 3 weeks? What's that mean? I don't have any idea.
Yeah, I would say a minimum, probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that you're an SC on the DISC profile for those people who know that. And Karen plays a really important role on our team because when the marketplace was like an auction, like talent would become available. It's like highest bidder, fastest HR team kind of wins the prize. You're like, we're not going to play that game. Like we are in this for the long term as a business and we're in it for the long term with these people's careers. And so we need to be attractive enough as a business that people will be willing to wait for us to go through the process we need to. And if they can't, that's fine.
Totally. Yeah. If they can certainly opt out. And on the other side of it, it has held us very accountable here internally, because one of the things that would happen every once in a while is I would have a senior leader in the organization fall in love with somebody and want to circumvent the process and like have their own conversations with them and move them through. And we can attach those times that they happened. Every single person that happened with no longer works here. It never worked out well for us. So nobody gets to circumvent this process. We all use the same process and we won't play that game anymore. It doesn't work.
We were just at our company kickoff and you showed a stat of like longevity. And it's like over 60% of the company has been here
5 years or more.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so when we're looking at and not that everybody has to stay here that long, but we want a fit that allows that.
Right.
And I think that requires, if that's an outcome we want, that requires a process where we get to know each other. And you've always really been an advocate for that too, of we don't just wear our prettiest, shiniest cultural outfit to all these interviews. Like we need to make sure people understand what it's really like to work here. What's your talk track sound like right now?
My mantra in this organization, you know this, it's always been, and in my own life, is no surprises. And sometimes that can come across as brutal honesty, but most of the time it comes across as transparency and authenticity. And it's important to me, one of the questions that I ask new hires on their 30-day check-in with me is, are there any surprises? Was there anything I missed? And more I'm getting like, no, there were no surprises. You guys told me everything to expect. And we do that with our performance assessment process, everything. It's no surprises. If you want to make me mad, surprise somebody.
Yeah.
It'll piss me off.
But I think the things that are true to our culture we're so proud of are things like, this is not a place you can hide. It's not a place you can hide. It's a place of high accountability, which if you're an achiever, that's music to your ears. If that's not an environment you're excited about, like every week you're going to know if you crushed it or not.
Yeah.
Then this place could feel like a fishbowl because there's like nowhere to hide.
No, which is why we want to set people up for success, because the people that didn't work out, that's on us. 100%. That is not any one of those individuals' problem. They did not lie to us. They didn't sneak through the door. We opened the door wide, let them in, and then we failed them. And that's embarrassing, and it's not good for our brand, and I hate that when that happens. So I think it's important that you're being so clear that a person is not blindsided when they walk in here.
I think the other thing that can be surprising to people is there's a persistence of pace in an agency that it kind of has to be a drug to you. That doesn't mean you don't get to sleep and go home and see your family, but it does mean like most days are big days.
Yeah. And I think it's not just tedious tactical work. I will tell you, even, sitting in the seat that I sit in, having done this type of work for over 30 years, I am always thinking. And so there's a mental aspect of it that you have to thrive on that.
Yeah. You have to make friends with it.
Yeah. That can't make you tired. And so for people who really want that, it's perfect. For people that it makes them tired because they want to just learn the thing and then it's done. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that those are just like cultural misalignments for us for sure. What advice do you give a new hiring manager?
Well, a lot of my advice is wrapped up in the training that I do for them. I will tell you, this is a little bit funny, but when someone starts working with me that hasn't before internally to hire a person, the first thing I tell them is, you may experience bitch Karen. Like, I'm just telling you right now, like, I don't screw around. And it is so important to me that I keep this process moving and communicate clearly with the candidate that if you don't have time when the candidate hits your inbox, you look at it. You tell me what to do next. When we move through the process, I want your feedback. If you can't do that, I am not going to go into this with you right now. So let me know, because I'm going to bother you on Sunday nights. I'm going to bother you all day long. I don't care how busy you are. But if we're going to hire someone, then they come first. And so I think people get to see a different side of me.
Yeah, it's all true.
Because typically people here don't work with me on projects. And when you're doing something like hiring somebody like that, you got to be all in.
So that prompts this thing I wanted to talk about, which is just because the process was done and you had proven it to be successful, you were very intentional about taking it through the organization. Let's talk about how you did that. You let the organization know we've updated our hiring process through quarterly kickoff. And then how and when do you train the hiring managers and the people who are going to be participating in it? Because I think that's a step that's missed.
And we did it too. I would just throw someone into an interview that had never done it before without proper coaching. And you know what they do? They do what they naturally would, and they just talk the whole time. They don't take time to pause and listen. They don't know what kinds of questions to ask. We're all asking the same questions, and it's not a good experience for the candidate. So now I have very specific training that we do. I have training modules I've created for all aspects of it. Through Lessonly, I sit down with the hiring manager, and it's not just new hiring managers. It's every single time I hire. If you've done it before, I don't care. We're going to go through it again. I have really clear documentation that I create specifically for each hire to walk them through the steps and to record, where we are and how we go. And, we use the applicant tracking system through Bamboo HR, which works great for us. It allows us to communicate back and forth and capture everything there. So
are you having people proactively create these exercises in the anticipation of needing to hire into different departments? Or as we go through this, are you having them create them in real time?
So I thought about, because you know me, I like to do everything ahead of time.
Yes, we do that.
But sometimes that's not a good idea. And I'm learning. So because the pace of change is so fast in what we do, I am waiting. And it's not until we know at that point in time that we're actually hiring, because we don't hire a lot. So it may be a year or more between hiring a particular position. And so I'll create it in real time to make sure that it's actually makes sense and it's accurate to what we're looking for now.
So not hiring a lot. Let's quantify that for listeners. We're hiring, would you say 6 to 10 people a year? Last year we hired 8, I want to say.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate.
Yeah, 6 to 10. So that kind of gives you like a sense of scale for us. And for every hire, how many, it depends on the role. See how many applicants.
That is interesting because that's a hard metric for me to pull because I don't passively hire very often. Like I don't post a job and hope somebody signs up. While we do post it on our website, sometimes I have aggregate sites like Glassdoor that pick it up, but a lot of those board postings like Monster and otherwise, they don't work well. So what I do is before I ever even post a job, I proactively recruit. So I have a system that's part of the training where I sit down with the hiring manager and I go through LinkedIn and I just reach out to people. And that works surprisingly well. The other thing is we have a database of future talent that we keep. And I promise those people that I will come back to them when we have a position open. And I do. So we go back and look through those individuals first. So a lot of times my job will never actually hit a job board anywhere. We'll just fill it.
Let's maybe touch on 2 quick things and then we'll wrap up. I would say big progress we made in 2022 was really solidifying the Growth Academy.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is and how you've seen that, impact our hiring process. And then I would say in 2022, we also began like over-indexing on building our employment brand and like really telling the stories of our people and what's happening in their careers. And I feel like this is a little bit of like a marketing advertisement by a marketing company for marketing. Marketers, marketing.
That's right.
So I'm aware of that, but just kind of share what we've done there and how that's impacted it.
The best way to articulate that is when do I get the aha moments from the candidate? When do their eyes really light up in the things that I talk to them about? One of them is when they visit our website. And, if you're a candidate looking for a job, you don't come for an interview without having looked at the website. The number of comments I get from people about how much they loved our website and they would dig deep and they would watch our videos that our own employees made about their own experiences. And that means a lot to them. And so they get a feel of the culture. They can sort of see the space. So that's one place that I think I always see people just light up. The second one is when I talk about our Growth Academy. And what our Growth Academy is basically pulling together all of the things we were already doing and focusing our sort of our external brand of Element 3 and turning the whole thing internally. So we would take things like our purpose. Well, those are the same externally and internally. They're meant to be that way. But like our target audience is different that we go after. Our 3 uniques, the things that make us unique, they're different for people inside than they are outside. And so taking that whole EOS, Vision Traction Organizer process for anyone that uses that and applying it to our people is what became the Growth Academy. So the Growth Academy itself is taking what our 3 uniques are, which is story, strategy, scorecard, and they're taking the story part and applying it to themselves. So how do I tell my own story? How do I build my own brand? And all of the resources below that help them and support them in doing that. Strategy, how do I determine what my career path is? How do I get personal development? All of the things that are associated with that. And then scorecard is how do I know how I'm doing? And all of the things that are associated. So that becomes what we call our Growth Academy. The nice thing about that is it was, as I was creating it, I remember it was your idea when you first said it, and it felt very big to me because you're very visual, and I have to really see what you're talking about. But the first time you said it was, why don't we take all these things we're already doing and call it something and package it in a way that people can see it all in one place? And when I started doing that, I thought, wow, we're actually creating something that is not aspirational. This totally exists. We do all of these things, and we do them, I think, pretty well. So.
Yeah, very well. Very well. Okay, we'll end on this. What was our last ENPS score, Karen?
94.
That's an HR mic drop. Boom. We're done. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Scared Confident. Until next time, keep telling fear. You will not decide what happens in my life. I will. If you want to get the inside scoop, sign up for my newsletter. We decided to make content for you instead of social media algorithms. The link is waiting for you in show notes, or you can head over to tiffanysauter.com. Thanks for listening.